Alright, you know how we just got over an entire decade and a half of 80s nostalgia bait? Well, you better get ready, because the 90s are next. And hey, that's okay, because the 90s were a hell of a decade, take it from me. I'm a child of the 90s, a true 90s kid. And by that, I mean I'm barely old enough to remember using these cups at my birthday parties. The 90s saw the first big internet boom. Console video games rarely came into their own. Final Fantasy was still objectively good. Hip-hop was on the mainstream rise. Boy bands were everywhere. Animated movies were still hand-drawn, and so were all your favorite cartoons. Dare wanted people to stop doing drugs, but people did them all anyway. Your local ice cream man was also your well-regarded candy cigarette dealer. It was a hell of a time. Some things in the 90s were niche to certain demographics, but if there was something that no one could escape, it was 90s era basketball. Even if you didn't give a rat's ass about basketball the sport like me, everyone and their North Korean cousin knew who household names like Kobe Bryant and Dennis Rodman were. Hell, look no greater than cultural icon Shaquille O'Neal, better known by his pseudonym in pre-21st century b-ball vernacular, Shaq. He was a hit star of his time, and half of it had nothing to do with fucking basketball. He was in that Genie movie everybody thinks Sinbad was in. He was also in Good Burger, which Sinbad was actually in.
Consider yourself tomato.
Hell, he even had his own Mortal Kombat style fighting game, Shaq Fu, which sucks. And Shaq is also objectively the worst character in it too. You know, I don't get what Aaron Carter was bragging about. Sure, he beat Shaq, but so did the rest of the roster. But make no mistake, there was no escaping 90s basketball stars in their heyday. Michael Jordan was so damn determined to make sure you knew he existed, he even started playing baseball. You know, the fact that this didn't result in a crazy storyline of b-ball stars forming their own baseball team a la the WCW invasion is one of the biggest failures of 90s sports, in hindsight. Well anyway, that Michael Jordan guy was no joke, and you had to get his Nikes. And the Looney Tunes were dead set on making sure that you buy them too. Mike and the Tunes, which really should have been an R&B spin-off, starred in a series of Nike commercials that all culminated into the most ambitious crossover and product placement event in history, the Space Jam. This movie is absolutely wild. When the Looney Tunes are threatened with intergalactic enslavement by aliens, they challenge them to a game of basketball to determine the fate of Saturday morning cartoons. However, when the aliens use their verboten extraterrestrial magic to steal the powers of top NBA players, they turn into the Monstars, the most dangerous group of b-ballers to walk the earth. It's at that point, the Looney Tunes turn to their only hope, professional baseball star and part-time basketballer Michael, I Believe I Can Fly Jordan, to whip the Toon Squad into shape and teach the Monstars that if you can't slam with the best, then you just jam with the rest. It's a legendary event in cinematic history. Hell, everyone was in it. That funny guy from the Ghost movie your dad liked was there. That fat guy from the dinosaur movie that made you wet the bed was there. The Looney Tunes, whom you watch viciously maim and brutalize each other on Cartoon Network every day after school, were there. It had the first appearance of Lola Bunny, meaning that if this was a comic book, it'd be selling for thousands of dollars on eBay right now. Anyway, 88 minutes and a newly created generation of furries later, Michael Jordan saved the Looney Tunes from demise, showed us that true courage came from the heart and mislabeled bottles of water, and that 90s CGI still had a very long way to go. Now, if you were 12 and under, this was objectively the best film you have ever seen. But anyone above that age knew the truth. It was pretty poopy. You know, like pretty much every kid's movie. Now, let's pivot to an incredibly different subject. Video games. First of all, in the 90s, all these NBA guys had video games of one kind or another. Most of them were sports games, but you know, there were a few weird outliers. The 90s is when video games really went into overdrive. Nintendo and Sega had a rivalry that made the US and Soviet Union look like chumps in comparison. There were tons of genres to choose from for your gaming pleasure. Platformers, fighting games, platform fighting games. But there was one that really stood out to anyone with a hint of maturity, or who wants to be a retrospective hipster about it, the RPG. While a lot of games were pushing video games further and further graphically, it was games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Baldur's Gate, heck even The Legend of Zelda, that were pushing video games further and further narratively. You could play video games in the 90s if you wanted to kill some time, but you could also play video games if you wanted to experience a story that you were actually a part of, and not just be a passive observer. As the internet grew in popularity going into the 2000s, Certain 90s mega-hit RPGs became revered for their narrative expertise and their ability to make you the star of the show. Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, Ocarina of Time, those games still show up on greatest games of all time lists to this day, and they used to very regularly top them not too long ago. RPGs were so popular that there was even a subculture dedicated to making their own RPGs on the computer using a program called RPG Maker. Of course, not everyone can be such a masterful artist as Tetsuya Nomura, nor as talented a composer as Nobuo Uematsu, so we just stole all their work without asking and made our own games with them. I even made an RPG Maker game at one point in my life. It's not very good and full of unfunny inside jokes, but damn did I have fun making it. Now that we've laid the groundwork, it's time to tie these synapses back to the nervous system. In the mid-2000s, a group of aspiring game developers who called themselves Tales of Games, yes, that apostrophe is in the right spot, they started work on a fun little game in RPG Maker. It was to be a satire of Japanese role-playing games like Final Fantasy, and a satire of gaming culture. However, as the project grew more ambitious, project leaders Chef Boyardee and Bort made the decision to take the project to Game Maker instead. Their creation was an amalgamation of everything they hoped to achieve and more. A potent satire of RPGs and video game culture in the at-the-time video game industry? Check. A wild nostalgia trip through 90s basketball and popular culture? Check. The most absurd and bizarre sequel to not just one, but two IPs you never saw coming? Check. And perhaps one of the most well put together and enjoyable indie video games ever made? Check. Lightning might only strike once, but they caught it in a bottle, and in 2008, Tales of Games released it for the world to see. Ladies and gentlemen, I must warn you, the video game you are about to see is canon.
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Here's your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Alright.
Tales of Games presents Chef Boyardee's Barkley, Shut Up and Jam, Gaiden, Chapter 1 of the Hoopz Barkley SaGa. Set in the post-cyber apocalypse in the year 2053, New York City was destroyed 12 years ago when Charles Barkley, legendary b-baller, performed the forbidden chaos dunk, a feat only he is capable of, setting off the great b-ball purge. Basketball was made illegal, ballers hunted down and executed or imprisoned. Some were allowed to live a quiet existence, while others like Michael Jordan, hero of the Space Jam, lived long enough to see himself become the villain. Charles Barkley, reduced to a shadow of his former self, lives in poverty with his only son Hoopz Barkley. He mourns the death of his wife Maureen, who he killed during his chaos dunk. He spends his days wallowing in deep regret, a somber existence that he shares with friend Balthios James, the octaroon great-grandson of the legendary Lebron James. However, one day, when another chaos dunk is performed by an unknown perpetrator connected to the terrorist organization B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E.S, Barkley is framed for murder of another 15 million people. Forced to flee from the b-ball removal department led by Michael Jordan, Charles is saved in the nick of time by the cloaked octaroon Zaubermancer, the ultimate hellbane, and they escape into the underbelly of Neo New York as he races to save his son Hoopz before it's too late. Of course, Barkley will have more than Michael Jordan and B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E.S to worry about during his adventure. He'll have to contend with the vengeful ghost of b-ballers who died during the purge. Dystopic megacorporation Square Enix Goya that makes everything from vidcons to high-powered weapons of war. Mad scientists, angry robots, deranged cultists, and one surprise pop culture appearance after another. I hate to do you a disservice by spoiling the journey for this game if you've never played it, but I will go into the story with more detail later. But for now, let me tell you how, despite having an utterly ridiculous story and being full of stolen and mishmashed art design, Shut Up and Jam Gaiden manages to be one of the most well-polished RPGs and indie games out there. That's the real majesty of this game. That's why this game has an actual Wikipedia page, and plenty of other dumb internet games don't. The core gameplay of Shut Up and Jam Gaiden is very reminiscent of the SNES and Genesis era JRPGs like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Phantasy Star, Chrono Trigger, you know the like. You'll control Charles and his fellow party members as you navigate towns and dungeons, interacting with NPCs which will regale you with everything from tips and tricks to world building and character developing conversations. Unlike some games of this genre, in areas where enemies frequent, there are no random encounters. Instead, they'll be represented by a sprite that will walk in a preset or randomized pattern. As you venture into the dank donjons of this game, you'll undoubtedly encounter a hilarious array of sprite edits, almost all of whom have a tongue-in-cheek basketball theme to them. If you and the enemy clash, you'll be taken to the battle screen, participating in a turn-based battle mode against each other. If you happen to catch the enemy group by surprise when their back is turned, you can ambush them and start the battle with a free surprise round. The battle system of Barkley is part of why this game is highly regarded. They simply could have put zero effort in and called it a day, having that very basic attack, item, run menu that's common in most indie RPG Maker styled games. But in Barkley, not only did they actually try to put in effort, they succeeded in making a battle system that's engaging, rewarding, and fun. During battle, each character has multiple options for basic attacks, all of which are effectively minigames. Charles Barkley's attacks revolve around timed button presses, where your ability to line up basketball shots, yes, he fights with basketballs, what did you expect? Your ability to line up basketball shots according to your meters will net you increased accuracy or extra damage. The ultimate Hellbane makes use of Zalbers, which are kinda like a sword, I guess it's never really explained, and his attacks involve button mashing or timed button press minigames instead. Another character has a laser beam attack that you need to manually control to target different enemies, while another is sorta like a monk and has a combo mechanic where you input attacks and finishing moves, filling up a gauge that requires you to execute proper timing and be spatially aware. It's very similar in vein to classics like Super Mario RPG, or for a modern form, South Park: The Stick of Truth, where your success or lack thereof at these minigames during battle will guide you to victory or hasten your demise. In addition to basic attacks, characters also learn special techniques unique to them as well. For instance, Barkley has the powerful double team attack, where a mirror image doppelganger joins him as he pelts enemies with b-balls from all sides. Meanwhile, the ultimate Hellbane, as a Zalbermancer, has several elemental spells that can target groups of enemies or attack enemy stats or even give them ailments such as diabetes or glaucoma. Other characters have healing techniques or powerful single target effects, filling those particular RPG party member tropes that we've come to expect. Except that's the goal of Barkley. It's to take your expectations, acknowledge them, and toss it back at you in some of the most absurd ways possible. Take for instance the status effects of this game. Instead of poison, a character can get diabetes, taking damage over time. Glaucoma acts as a form of blindness, halving your accuracy, and Asperger's makes social situations awkward. Here's the thing about this game that you should be aware of. It is by and large a product of its time. It has that mid-2000s edgy internet humor at times, the kind you would find at places like Something Awful or Newgrounds during the time. Things like handicaps and disorders that were the punching bags of jokes during those days, as well as jokes about things like racial stereotypes and some pop culture or even historical references that likely haven't aged particularly well, all appear in Shut Up and Jam Gaiden to some extent. Now, in today's more culturally sensitive times, some people might and likely will take some offense to the occasional joke in this game. In the defense of Barkley, many of these jokes don't come from any actual place of malice. In many cases, they are satirical, often serving as a jab at the kind of person who would be malicious about it. For example, that Asperger's status effect, it does absolutely nothing. Almost like there's nothing actually wrong with having it. Satire is at the very heart of what makes Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden what it is. It doesn't pull any punches, and it goes all in on its slam dunks in many cases. One of the most iconic aspects of this game are the save points. The talking truck pump that before you're able to save, that will sometimes spit out at you several dialogue boxes of weeaboo-style rants celebrating Japanese-made console video games, referred to as VidCons, while scowling and berating those who might be a fan of Western games such as Madden or Quake. Ugh. The irony here being that this is a Japanese-styled RPG made by a team of Western developers, itself based on an American sports icon. These rants are dictated in the style of over-aggressive internet forum posts. It's a lampooning of internet gaming culture at the time. The type of name-calling you'd find on sites like GameFAQs or NeoGAF at the time is captured here, And the same kind of hyperbole and favoritism you'd see in an internet flame war today are present as well. To double down on the irony, all the truck pump rants are made up, except for two. One is actually pulled directly from a Something Awful forum post, and the other is actually from a poster from a game development forum that mistook the truck pump ramps in the demo version of the game he played as being serious and legitimate propaganda. One of the antagonists of the game is mega corporation Square Enix Goya, a parody of the merger between Squaresoft and Enix that was still fresh in everybody's mind when this game was made. Characterized by a staunch avarice and a desire to sell you everything from the latest copy of Octo-Lad to your own personal high-powered pistol, the butt of the joke is how both implausible it seems to be that an entertainment company could even evolve into that, and yet how strangely correct it feels. In today's world where big tech and massive companies like Disney and Warner Brothers seem to be gobbling up everything under the sun, it's a weirdly still relevant piece of satire that verges on the cusp of palpability. Basically, it hits really close to home that maybe an actual Square Enix Goya-esque corporation isn't too far around the corner. Also, healing items take the form of high-C ecto-coolers, chicken fries, and insulin shots. I find it funny, and I don't care what you think. Alright, now I want to get into the story of Barkley, because it's one hell of a laugh riot. But I must say again that you would get a much better effect from the story if you play it yourself. So skip ahead to this time if you want to avoid spoilers. After we get rescued by the mysterious Ultimate Hellbane, we make our way through ancient B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E catacombs where we learn much about the lore of this world. Not only does everything in this universe revolve around the great sport of basketball, with everything from B-Ball energy being the source of magic to B-Ball neutrinos powering vending machines. But we also learn that the ball from Space Jam, which held Charles Barkley captive and siphoned his powers, is known as the Ultimate B-Ball. As we near the end of the dungeon, we dispatch the angry zombie form of Kobe Bryant, which is one of those jokes that really hasn't aged quite well. And we have a heart-to-heart moment with the ghost of LeBron James. Here, the Ultimate Hellbane reveals that he's actually Balthios James the entire time, ignoring the fact that he has perhaps the most ineffective mask this side of the 2020 pandemic. Anyway, LeBron James clues us into the idea that the Ultimate B-Ball, which was thought to have lost its powers, may actually contain dormant powers instead, and that perhaps someone got a hold of it and used it to perform the Chaos Dunk. This would explain a lot, since only Charles should be able to perform a Chaos Dunk, and he vowed never to do so again. If the Ultimate B-Ball still had some of Barkley's powers, then someone else could have performed the Chaos Dunk instead, but our heroes cannot be sure. LeBron forgives Barkley for kicking off the Great B-Ball Purge, and bids him and Balthios to find the Cyberdwarf, who lives within the sewers. Entering the sewers, we're greeted to one of my favorite tracks in the game. Oh yeah, Barkley's Shut Up and Jam Gaiden actually has a lot of original music in it, in addition to the Slam Jam remix theme and some borrowed songs. And they have some funny names too, like the boss theme. It's named Jonathan Taylor Thomas. Anyway, in the sewers, Barkley and Balthios find an inactive cyborg that turns out to be the remains of Vince Carter, now known as Vinceborg 2050. Vince has amnesia, and cannot recall much except that he was badly injured, and during the B-Ball Purge, he was turned into a cyborg and given a mission. But he cannot recall what that mission is. Recognizing his old friendship with Barkley and LeBron James, he joins Charles and Balthios on their journey. Together, the trio make their way to Cesspool X, which is a gigantic satire of the furry fandom. The people who live down here have undergone very expensive surgery to transform themselves into humanoid animals. They live in the sewers due to heavy persecution they face on the surface in Neo, New York. Barkley starts to really shine through in his characterization in this game in this moment. He's effectively the straight man amongst all the insanity. Things bounce off of him like a brick wall. He has no time for nonsense and takes all the ridiculous statements about the de facto lore of the world that Balthios and other characters throw at him and casts it aside all the time. He's a man on a mission. He cares about one thing: saving his son. Animal people and B-Ball ghosts be damned. Meanwhile, Balthios is more the scholar of the group. He's a lampoon of nerd culture as well, with the way he'll rattle on about very niche and sometimes totally irrelevant subjects. So he's pretty much a parody of me, if you think about it. The Cyberdwarf lives amongst the people of Cesspool X. He's a prophesizing dwarf from space that crash-landed on Earth. Due to the wreck, he was taken to the hospital where they only had B-balls to graft to his damaged body. so his skin is made of B-balls. It turns out that Cyberdwarf believes Hoopz Barkley, Charles' son, to be the One, a sort of B-ball messiah. He joins the party, and our team of 4 set off to find Hoopz, but not before we go into an optional dungeon, which is the haunted tomb of Dikembe Mutombo, who teaches us the holy dunk after we set his spirit free. Before rescuing Charles, Balthios left Hoopz with Larry Bird at the local church, where Larry became a priest of the universe's god, Clispathe. Barkley and Larry had a heated argument earlier, and Larry urged Barkley to let go of his guilt and move on. However, when our team of heroes arrive at the church, Michael Jordan is there waiting for them. He's killed Larry Bird, and is about to hurt Hoopz to get to Charles. When Hoopz begins to pray to Clispathe, Cyberdwarf remarks that Hoopz might be the One. This triggers Vince Borg's memories, and he reveals that he's an agent of B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E S, whose mission is to actually kill Hoopz Barkley. Vince teams up with Jordan, and you battle the two of them to the tune of Eternity from Blue Dragon, named in the metadata as Jesus Christ, the guy from Deep Purple sang this. Defeated, Jordan and Vince Borg manage to escape while Charles mourns the loss of Larry Bird. Reconvening back in Cesspool X, the heroes debate what this could all mean. When the subject of the ultimate B-ball comes up, Cyberdwarf reveals that he thinks B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E S got their hands on the ultimate B-ball as well, and that it has regained its powers over time. Their only lead is the journey to Proto-Neo New York, to the old Spaulding building. In order to get to Proto-Neo New York, the heroes have to first butt heads with Dr. Allard, who's heavily implied to be Jay Allard from Microsoft, and is the one charging people exorbitant amounts of money to turn themselves into animal-human hybrids. Apparently, he also does a mean Charles Barkley face surgery as well. Barkley and the team kick his ass and gain access to Proto-Neo New York, which is underneath Neo New York. And if you think about it, isn't Proto-Neo New York just New York? This place is ground zero of the original Chaos Dunk. Negative B-ball energy permeates the area, turning people into grotesque mutants, and is haunted by ghosts, the worst of which is the vicious Ghost Dad. Yeah, probably another cameo that's aged terribly. Anyway, with the help of Joanna Mann, who had an old unrequited love for Charles, we take up a Monster Hunter-styled quest to hunt down the Ghost Dad to get rid of the fog preventing us from getting to the old Spaulding building. One of my favorite side quests starts around this part. A character who is a guns blaster, an intentional terrible mistranslation of gun blaster, and also an unnamed suit from Square Enix Goya are both interested in acquiring the final gun, which is thought to be in the old Spaulding building. Both offer you a reward, but you can only claim one. Entering the Spaulding building, you have to find colored keycards to activate the lift, and that requires searching every nook and cranny to progress, including trash cans, much to Balthios' lament. But hey, one of those trash bins has the final gun in it, which is Hoop's ultimate weapon. That's right, Charles fights with a basketball, but he lets his 12-year-old son fight with a gun.
You have to stop doing this, Barkley. You'll get diabetes or something. Give me a minute, there's something in here. Holy shit, Balthios, look at this thing, it's a gun! We got one final guns.
If you give it to Mark, you get a bumper sticker that does absolutely nothing. And Square Enix Goya will pay you only a pittance for it, so you might as well keep it. As we explore the old Spaulding building, we learn that the researchers at Spaulding, known as Dr. Davis and Dr. Cosby, were creating a prototype B-ball that was based upon the ultimate B-ball. The goal was to create a basketball that could give its wielder the ability to become a great basketball player. However, when a test subject accidentally performs a small chaos dunk, killing himself, Dr. Cosby gets cold feet. Dr. Davis, on the other hand, convinced that using more manufactured slamacite in the ball instead of manufactured jamacite will act as a safeguard, and he vows to continue the experiments. Dr. Cosby says no more, and he leaves, but not before his janitor Leonard picks up the prototype B-ball and accidentally performs a chaos dunk, killing Dr. Cosby in the process. Dr. Cosby goes on to become the Ghost Dad, if you couldn't figure that out. Waiting for us at the top of the Spaulding building is Scott H. Creelman, former CEO of Spaulding. He's been waiting for Barkley for a long time, implying that he's also a ghost. After challenging Barkley's strength because fate has deemed it necessary, he gives Barkley the unfinished prototype, known as the Hell B-Ball. His final farewell bids Charles to reactivate its powers by infusing it with jamacite. However, before anything else can transpire, Jordan ambushes the party and injects Hoopz with type 2 diabetes, the kind they were never able to cure, sending Hoopz into a coma. After berating Jordan by calling him a sick motherfucking baka, the trio confront Joanna Man for help. Joanna tells Barkley that there may be a way to save Hoopz. Long ago, on Liberty Island, a cult of worshippers gathered around a miracle worker named B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E, who is said to be able to cure diabetes. But contact with Liberty Island has since been cut off, and it's a risky venture to get there. There's only 2 ways to get to Liberty Island. You can take the ferry or go by Underground Railroad, and both are equally hilarious. The Underground Railroad is piloted by Harriet Tubman, of course. After what's thought to be a bugbear makes its way onto the train, she sends Barkley and crew to check it out, only for them to be confronted with assassins from the B-Ball removal department who follow them there. After taking them out in a series of quick-time events, we get a hilarious cutscene where we have to disconnect the coupling of the train with the rightmost switch or else a bomb will take the whole train out. My personal favorite of the 2 is the ferry. After a heart-to-heart conversation about how the moon reminds Barkley of his wife Maureen's head, which also reminds him of a basketball, Charles observes that it must be Columbus Day for the moon to be so big. This causes Balthios to freak out and rush below deck without an explanation. Then, all of a sudden, a rampaging Dwerger attacks Barkley and Cyberdwarf. He even casts level 2 M.O.S.E.S acid arrow. It turns out that Balthios was cursed long ago by a gypsy to be a were-dwerger, and turn into a rampaging dwerger every Columbus Day. So if you're the type who's looking to cancel Columbus Day, well, tack that one onto the end of your list as well. Finally, we've arrived at Liberty Island, which is a parody of adventure games where every object, including people, presents a dialogue box to examine, use, take, and leave. And here we get roped into another nonsensical adventure. The cultists of B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E have been overrun by a mythical beast called the Diabeesti, and a lone cultist named Rutherford, who's later revealed to be the rogue cultist Raffleson, who's actually Richards, but prefers Reginald, is the one who is pretending to be the Diabeesti and is planning to kill B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E because he wanted to clone B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E instead, so he faked being the Diabeesti and killed other people, but he's been locked out of Liberty Tower and needs us to get the keys from himself to open it for him. But we kill him, and the Diabeesti turns out to be real anyway, so I don't know who the fuck to even believe anymore. Anyway, we make it to the top, and it's revealed that B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E is actually an anagram. The miracle healer's true name is Brimley, as in Wilford Brimley. And yes, I think this cameo aged quite well, how could you tell? B.L.O.O.D.M.O.S.E reveals that he can't cure diabetes, but instead takes diabetes from others and absorbs it into himself. He's hooked up to a giant insulin machine, and he doesn't have much longer to live. Charles pleads with Brimley to save Hoopz, but then Vinceborg shows up to try and kill us again. We manage to defeat him, and almost succeed in turning him to good, but he flees before we can convince him. Brimley agrees to save Hoopz, even though Brimley will likely die in the process. He absorbs Hoopz' diabetes, and we leave Liberty Island behind, a desolate place devoid of life, as Brimley passes on, but he has also passed on his hope to us. In order to get the Jam-A-Site we need to restore the Hell B-Ball, we need to go to Cuchulain's tomb. Who is he? Well, he's the evil Celtic space warlord imprisoned by Clispaith and desperate to be freed, and he'll try to trick our heroes with their most personal desires in order to get them to free him. Cuchulain's tomb is the final dungeon, and it's filled with fun moments like Balthios running the gauntlet of Spartans, Cyberdwarf, and a very frustrating puzzle involving invisible platforms and sand. And of course, Charles accidentally freeing Cuchulain when he's tricked with his most personal desire, Incan gold. The heroes retrieve the Jam-A-Site, and Charles is alerted to a mysterious presence, an ancient sentient magic B-Ball that calls to him from the depths of Cuchulain's tomb, Shimmerglobe. Barkley restores power to the Hell B-Ball, and bonds with Shimmerglobe as well, attaining a type of B-Ball nirvana. He has ascended and made peace with himself, and he has embraced his new role as a guardian of the last vestiges of B-Ball and its hope for the future. The only way forward is to find the ultimate B-Ball and stop whoever is wielding it. Thanks to Charles' new state of nirvana, he's able to find it quite easily. It's on Necron 5, the slave ship in space. In order to get there, the heroes will have to take Cyberdwarf's newly repaired spaceship on a voyage. But before we do that, we have to free some enslaved workers working in the chuck mines from their racist genie masters, who are working under the iron thumb of Square Enix Goya. If we side with the genies, we get a magic lamp that has Kazam in it, which, is not very useful, but it's utterly fucking hilarious. Meanwhile, siding with the Dwergers will net us the ultimate armor for Barkley, the Shrek Mono, a kimono with a picture of Shrek on it. We can also make a little side trip using a magic whistle to travel to the B.Ball dimension, where we can participate in a mock Monster Rancher scenario where we raise B-balls that do absolutely nothing. We can also take Cyberdwarf on a date with a WNBA player. And last but not least, we can help Barkley atone for his past by winning the championship in the arena and helping the vengeful Kevin Garnett find peace and forgiveness within himself. Oh, and don't forget to give Dick Vitale a handful of Neo-Shekels for Kino. Back on Earth, after a brief appearance on the world map and onto Cyberdwarf's ship, we arrive on Necron 5. Our first encounter is with a repentant Vinceborg, who as a final farewell, overrides his orders to kill Hoopz and activates his self-destruct sequence. Then it's time for the final showdown as two giants collide. Michael Jordan versus Charles Barkley. One-on-one, mano-y-mano. Just the two of them in sweet Georgia Brown. Barkley defeats Jordan, ending their long-standing rivalry. But Jordan was not the man behind the curtain. Instead, the real villain was Charles Barkley all along. Well, Shadow Barkley, to be precise. A personified anger and resentment, and all of Charles' negative B-ball energy that was stored in the Ultimate B-ball, which grew over time into his shadowy doppelganger. He has deemed the human race inferior for squandering the glorious game of B-ball, and is convinced that destroying humanity is the only way to restore basketball. Meanwhile, Charles, who has gone through this journey and has grown and shed his resentful and guilty past as the destroyer of basketball, realizes that there is still hope in the future for B-ball, and that hope lies not with him, but with the next generation, and with his son Hoopz. He's grown to see that basketball became corrupted, and realizes that basketball was not destroyed, but given a clean slate. However, so long as Shadow Barkley and the Ultimate B-Ball exist, the future remains in jeopardy. After a battle with Shadow Barkley and his final form, T-Rex Barkley, neither hero nor villain are willing to give up. Charles realizes what he must do. He bids Balthios and Cyberdwarf to take care of Hoopz and to withdraw. After a bittersweet farewell, they depart. However, Balthios too is forced to stand his ground to hold off the Monstars, who have appeared on Necron 5 from out of nowhere to stop their escape, leaving only Cyberdwarf and Hoopz to enter an escape pod. It's at that moment where Barkley, taking up Shimmer Globe and the Hell B-Ball, performs his legendary Forbidden Jam, the Chaos Dunk, in a sequence that does not disappoint. Necron 5, Shadow Barkley, and the Ultimate B-Ball are seemingly destroyed, but with a heavy cost. Charles has sacrificed himself, and it seems as though Balthios did not manage to escape in time either. With a heavy air of sorrow, Cyberdwarf assures Hoopz that their bittersweet victory is just the beginning, and that there is nothing but hope on the horizon, leaving off the story on a massive cliffhanger. And there was at one point going to be a continuation of this story. Barkley 2 was launched on Kickstarter on November 28, 2012, with a modest goal of $35,000 to crowdfund an official and no copyright infringement sequel. The Kickstarter raised over $120,000. Most of the funds would go into developing brand new assets for the game, which would no longer use things like stolen sprites and artwork, while a portion would also go to the developers working on the project. Barkley 2 was set to have a very big vision. A dynamic, changing world that was open for exploration. It would be a loot-driven action RPG that follows the amnesiac gun-toting baller named X11-4 Jam 9 on his quest to locate the Cyberdwarf, who would be the one that can inform him about his forgotten past. Planning for a 2013 or 2014 release, Barkley 2 was seemingly a game never meant to be. Perhaps they bit off a bit more than they can chew. While a playable demo surfaced on Kickstarter a few years into development, it was revealed in 2016 that pretty much most of the funds had run out by that time, leaving the development team with little means or motivation to commit to the project. In 2019, an announcement was made that development was continuing, but at a snail's pace. Most of the team had left the project by this point, with only 2 developers putting in minimal part-time work as they pursued other projects. Seemingly dead and buried, Barkley 2 did have one last surprise in store, and recently too. In June 2021, as a final means of resignation from the team, the game was cancelled officially. However, this was immediately followed by the release of the full source code of the project with all assets included under a Creative Commons license. Theoretically, this means that any enterprising individual is welcome to continue to work on Barkley 2 if they find themselves with the time. In fact, the licensing for the game requires any future release to be non-commercial, in a way, freeing it from some of the restraints that held Barkley 2's development back, such as the need to create non-copyrighted assets. Perhaps the story of Barkley 2 is not actually over, and maybe this was something that not only needed to happen, but will bring the project much closer in line with the vision and tone of the first game as well. As for Shut Up and Jam Gaiden, I often joke that it's one of the best JRPGs ever made. And the irony there is that it's kinda true, considering how it was made and where the bar should realistically be set for it and how much it fucking clears it. I mean, it's a goofy fan-made game that started as an in-joke about whether Space Jam was canon to Michael Jordan's life story, that uses stolen artwork, that has about as much of a cohesive design as a 4-year-old's macaroni art, and an utterly ridiculous story. But yet the amount of effort and passion put into Barkley is evident in every second of it. The battle system has almost no right to be as good and engaging as it is. Every character is unique, every battle requires you to plan and pay attention, every animation is both hilarious and awesome. The absolute lunacy of the story is offset by the fact that it's played straight the entire time. At no point does the game turn to you and wink as if to say, hey, look how silly we're being, pretty crazy, haha, right? No, instead it takes itself 100% seriously. It never falters, stutters, or pauses. It sucks you in and forces you to embrace the zaniness as the de facto element of the world building. You will not only embrace that this is the world of a post-cyber apocalypse where everything from science to swordplay revolves around basketball, but by the end, you will be left wondering how the hell they got you so invested to actually care so much about it. The satirical nature of the game has seemingly transcended the time it was made in a lot of respects. Just the same, the lampooning of the video game industry and commercialization in general remains more palpable than perhaps ever before. I'm convinced that a real-life Square Enix Goya is not too far around the corner. Jokes about internet culture, gaming culture, and even nostalgia bait all remain surprisingly relevant as well. Perhaps the true beauty of Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden is that it's a reflection of not only the time it was made, but also the generation that made it. A generation that grew up watching Space Jam and loving Michael Jordan. A generation that was raised on Final Fantasy and Dragon Quest. A generation that got introduced to crazy and zany internet flash games and fan games. It bridges the gap between the 1990s and the 2000s in a way that few other pieces of media can, in the way it's a nostalgic embracement of 90s culture with the sharp and at times edgy wit of 2000s internet humor. It's a time capsule of not just one, but 2 eras of gaming, of culture, and of a demographic. and one that I have no doubt will be continued to be remembered in the future. So forget all about Space Jam 2. It's not even canon, it doesn't even say so on the movie. And always remember, friends, if you can't slam with the best, just jam with the rest.